Good morning children, how are you all? Hope you all are fine and safe. Myself Jeeva and I am your new computer teacher. Okay, so today let's start our portion with our first chapter, that is inside a computer. So today we are going to study what is happening inside our computer. So in the previous classes you studied about the CPU, the different parts of our computer, that is a CPU, input devices, output devices, all this about all these devices you have learned. So let us recap what you studied in the previous classes. Okay. So here are some questions for you. So first one, dash takes the input, processes it and passes it on to the output devices. What takes the input and what processes it and passes it to the output devices? What is it? It is the CPU. Okay. Then second one, the dash of a computer is used to do all the arithmetic calculations and to compare numbers. So many calculations we can do in our computer. So with the help of what we are doing all these calculations? It is arithmetic and logic unit. The short form is ALU, arithmetic and logic unit. Then third one, the dash manages the flow of information amongst various parts of the computer. So what manages the flow of information? It is the control unit. The short form is CU, control unit. The next one, dash stores all the data that is to be processed. What stores the data that is to be processed? Where it stores all the data that is to be processed? It is in the memory unit. MU, that is memory unit. Then dash holds the instructions about a process on which the computer is currently working. So some instructions are there, some built-in instructions are there in the computer. So what holds the instructions? It is RAM, random access memory. Okay. The next one, dash can be accessed directly by the CPU. What can be accessed directly by the CPU? It is primary memory. The next one, dash stores information that can only be read and not be written onto. So in this case holds some instructions and on which the component is currently working. So this can be changed. But here it stores information, we can only read the information. We cannot write on it or we cannot modify it. What is it? It is ROM, read only memory. Then eighth one, data once stored on a dash device does not get deleted unless the user does so. So we are storing, after doing some work, we are saving it. So when we save this, after switching off, when we switch off the system, again when we are switching on the system, that data will be there in the system. Okay. So where it stores? It is in the secondary storage device. So till we delete the data will be there in the secondary storage device. Then in the previous classes you have studied all the processes are done by the CPU. So can you tell me what is this? You might be saying this is the CPU, but it is not the CPU. This is the CPU box. This is only a box. So within this CPU box, the CPU or the processor is there. So this is the processor. All processors are done using this processor. Okay. So this is the CPU box, and within this CPU box the processor is kept. Okay, here you can see this is an opened CPU box. Here you can see a small rectangle shaped one. This is the processor. Okay, and this is the motherboard. So okay, so the CPU of this is the CPU of a personal computer or a desktop. Okay, so the CPU of a personal computer or a laptop is different. So here the CPU, it's a big one, but laptop, it's a very thin. So the CPUs of the PC and laptop is different. So this is the CPU of a PC. Okay, then before we study what happens inside the computer, we need to know about the motherboard. So what is a motherboard? It contains the various components that handle the flow of information inside the computer. So what is what is there in the motherboard? The various components that handle the flow of information inside the computer. So this is an opened CPU, and this portion, it is the motherboard. Okay, and it provides the connectivity between the hardware, the processor, memory unit, hard disk, hard drive, all this, it connects all these things inside the CPU box. Okay, so this is the motherboard. Here you can see the ports that are used to connect some output devices, and all these are in the motherboard. RAM, ROM, CPU, processor, all these things are there in the motherboard. So it provides connectivity between all these devices. Okay, then switching on a computer. So when we switch on a computer, it takes some time, isn't it? Why it takes this much time to boot up? What is booting? What do you mean by booting? The process of starting a computer is known as booting. The process of starting a computer is known as booting. So when we start a computer, there is an operation which is performed automatically by the computer. That is called booting. So at the time of booting, the computer checks all the hardwares and softwares, those are installed in the system. Okay, so in this booting system, or in this booting process, all the files, those are stored in the ROM chip, will be loaded by running the system. Okay, so when we switch on the system, some processes are taken place inside the computer. Now let us study the processes that are taken place at the time of booting up. Okay, so first one, the process that takes place when a computer is booted up. So here you can see one flowchart, that is first power on the computer. So when we power on computer, what happens? BIOS performs post. After that, it goes to the disk and RAM, then loading of operating system. Now let us study all these in detail. So first process is power good signal. So when we switch on the computer, the CPU gets a power supply. So here you can see in the motherboard, here you can see the CPU. So this gets a power supply. So this sends a signal to the motherboard. So what is motherboard? It provides connectivity between all these things on the computer. Okay, so when we switch on the computer, the CPU gets the power supply and it sends signal to the motherboard. So from the motherboard, all these things are getting, all these things started working. Okay, then second one, BIOS. What is the full form of BIOS? It is basic input or output system. What do you mean by BIOS? Basic input or output system. What is this BIOS? It refers to the instructions for booting a computer. So it's a set of instructions for booting a computer. So it is located on a chip on the motherboard, that is inside the computer, and it is designed to protect from any disk failure. If there is any to protect the computer from any disk failure, this BIOS helps. When you switch on the computer, as a sudden action, your computer is switched off. Then again, when you are switching on the computer, you can see a screen like this. Repair your computer, safe mode with interring. Like this is a booting screen. So it checks whether there is any failure happened or not, because we are not shut down the system properly. Okay, so then when we take this BIOS setup, you can see these things. If there is any failure, we can go to this page and we can make changes here. Okay, no need to worry more about this thing. I just showed you what is a BIOS screen. Okay, the next one, post. What is this post? It is power on self test. What is post? Power on self test. The post checks if all hardware components are working properly. It checks for all the devices that is inside the computer, including RAM, and also checks the secondary storage devices. Okay, if all the hardware passes the post, first what happens in the post? It checks all the hardware components, and if it passes the post, it continues the boot up process, and if there is any failure, it generates a beep code to indicate the error encountered, and the computer will not boot it up. So if it passes the post only, the computer will boot up. If there is any failure, the computer will not boot up. Okay, then the fourth step is OS, that is operating system. What is an operating system? It is the most important software that runs on a computer. So it manages the computer's memory and processors, and it's a software and hardware. So what is an operating system? It manages the computer's memory and processors, as well as all of its software and hardware. Okay, and it is stored on the hard drive. The operating system is stored on the hard drive, and it connects the hardware and software of the computer. So this operating system connects the hardware and software of the computer, and the BIOS transfers it from the hard drive to the RAM. So when the computer is booting up, the BIOS transfers it from the hard drive to the RAM. At this stage, the user sees the login screen. So after the BIOS transfers it to the RAM, the user can see the login screen. So till when you see the login screen, from switching on the computer, this much processes are happening inside the computer. Okay, so let's have a recap of what we studied today. So what is a CPU? It is a processor, and this is called the brain of the computer. And when we switch on the computer, 4 processes are happening inside the computer, and first one is power, good signal. Second one, BIOS. What is BIOS? Basic input or output system. Then post. What is post? Power on self test, and OS, that is operating system. Okay, so you have some homeworks in page number 9. One exercise is given, that is think and discuss. So write the answers, all the answers I had given in your PPT. So write all these in your notebook. Read and study this portion. We will see you in the next class. Thank you.